Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the London Borough of Newham Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And those who are viewing remotely, can you hear me? Paul and others, can you hear me? Thank you. This meeting is held in Newham East Hampton Hall. Members unable to join us physically at this location can join us remotely. However, they will not be able to vote and their attendance won't be officially recorded, although their virtual attendance will be noted in the minutes. I'd like to welcome members of the public and the press who are attending physically or who are viewing remotely. With regards to meeting etiquette, members of the council, can I ask that you raise your physical hand, or if you are remotely, your virtual hand, if you wish to speak. Please can everyone be sensible of the COVID etiquette. And with that, I now call this meeting to order. Welcome to everyone for attending, both officers, members, and members of the executive. Apologies for absence.
Chair, we have Councillor Thelma Doy and Helen Kemp.
Yeah. Those noted. Declaration of interest. Are there any members wishing to declare any interest? Councillor Booker.
Yes, I'd like to declare an interest as the CEO of Alternatives Trust East London, which is in a partnership project with Newham Nurture, who are part of the maternity care and health inequalities paper.
Yeah, we will know that in the minutes. Any other declaration of interest? No. Thank you. We now move to item 4, minutes of our last meeting. We have minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of February, of March, and 29th of March. So we'd have to take them in order. Of February. Can I move that those minutes are accurate, correct? Nate? Councillor Higgins?
Amendment to propose. So on page 9, paragraph 3, there's a discussion of the voting system used to select projects for the community assembly and the committee's concerns that it wasn't robust enough against fraud. The paragraph as it's written doesn't express, in my view, the strength of the feeling about this issue. And so I had a third sentence to insert after the second sentence, which would convey that strength of feeling. I can read that out for you.
Yeah, please do.
However, committee members expressed the belief that there might be an incentive for individual members to cheat the system so that preferred projects receive money, and therefore members were not fully convinced of the robustness of the system. To this end, the committee will continue to monitor the evolution of the process.
Thank you. Those who are present, does that reflect the feelings of the meeting at the time? I've seen members indicating. Okay, Michael, can you make, so is it agreed that we insert that additional sentence?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. So can I now sign off those as accurate minutes?
Yeah. 2 amendments on that same page.
Okay.
One related to paragraph 2. I think it was clear that cabinet members present said that they recognised that the equality impact assessment wasn't fit for purpose at the time. And the other amendment was we did resolve, or we did agree, that there would be a paper brought back to overview and scrutiny to talk about the merits and disadvantages of crowdfunding.
Yes. Yeah. Are those agreed, those amendments? To the minutes? Yeah. Thank you. If I don't have any other, can I move that these are now correct, taking into account the amendments, correct records of the meeting, and that is the meeting held on the 16th of February. Now we move to the minutes of the 16th of March. Do I have any contribution? Not, I move that those are correct records of the meeting held on the 16th of March. And we now move to the minutes on the 29th of March. The contributions,
What's that?
29th.
It's not in,
Yeah.
it's not in the pack.
16th of March.
Yeah.
And tonight.
And the supplementary,
Sorry, Chair. Oh, that's the scrutiny. Thank you. Was that the scrutiny? Think of. They are published. Yes, supplement.
yeah,
Oh, then I
Yeah. can I move that the correct records of the meeting?
We haven't had a chance to read them.
Okay, right. Now, can we defer? Yes, okay. Now, I have noted, and I've raised it in other meetings, matters to do with the timeliness of the minutes. I wouldn't elaborate on it now, but we take it to another place and discuss the need for timely minutes. Yeah, is that noted?
And it is.
Yeah. Item 5,
Chair, just to say somebody's in the waiting room.
yes, there's somebody in the waiting room.
Simon.
One of the officers.
Simon Reed.
Adult. Sorry, adults.
Right. Item 5, namely maternity care and health inequalities. Councillor Susan Master, chair of this commission, and I would ask Councillor Master to present this item to us, after which we will have a chance to discuss the matter before voting on this acceptance. Councillor Master, it's over to you.
Thank you. So I'm proud to introduce Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny into maternity care and health inequalities. Since the early 90s and beyond, it's been clear that different ethnicities have very different outcomes from maternity services. Nationally, if you're Black, you're 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than if you're white. If you are Asian, you're almost twice as likely to experience poorer outcomes. This is totally unacceptable. How can it be that decades on from this first being raised, despite many task forces and NHS initiatives, that such inequalities persist? This report is the end of a journey that started back in October of last year for our committee. Scrutiny had looked at maternity services in the past, but only ever from the point of view of addressing service issues raised by the CQC regarding the maternity unit at Newham University Hospital, themselves examined as part of wider reports on the performance of the hospital. The report I've tabled today takes a very different approach. In our previous year, Health Scrutiny examined the Marmot approach to health inequalities. This draws links between poor health outcomes and a person's financial, educational, employment, environmental, cultural, and ethnic circumstances and characteristics, rather than just examining their health behaviours and clinical treatment in isolation. In 2021 to 22, we looked at how such an approach might look in practice and assessed our council's new 50-step strategy, which has Marmot at its heart. This year, we decided we'd apply the same principles to inequalities in our wider local system, starting with maternity outcomes. I've already referenced the national picture, but in Newham, the disparities are particularly acute. The highest level of stillbirths to women of Black or Asian or other origin compared to white mothers, and highest average proportion of women giving birth to babies of low birth weight in North East London. Women also tend to present later in their pregnancy and are more likely to need to access A&E during this period. While higher levels of obesity, hypertension, and risk of type 2 or gestational diabetes might explain some of these disparities, all issues that can be supported if identified from the start, this is not the whole story. Our report takes this wider Marmot lens to what issues are underlying this, but equally accepts that there are data limitations that also seriously require addressing. It's a hefty tome of a report, but much of it documents the vast amount of research going on and support available locally. Rather than replicate that, we chose to focus on the work that still needs doing. The timeliness of our report is illustrated by the fact it brings a Newham dimension to reports brought in mid-April, both by the London Assembly Health Committee, looking at maternity inequalities issues from a London perspective, and at a national level by the Parliamentary Women Inequalities Committee, led by the Right Honourable Caroline Noakes MP. Our recommendations, as you can see, focus on a number of areas we found key: improving the quality of data, improving the clarity of local targets and how we'll track progress, the ongoing collation of experiences of the service by Newham mothers, improve partnership working between housing, public health, our Newham money and the NHS, ring-fence funding of the voluntary sector, an improved sign-up process for antenatal services to ensure potential issues are flagged from the off, a focus on ensuring consistency of care expressed in desire for reflection on the current viability of the Barking Birth Centre for Newham women, given its impact on local staff allocation, and greater scrutiny of overseas charging, given the significant number of women wrongly charged for maternity services and the impact this is bound to have both on the experience of maternity and on the likelihood of people from marginalised communities seeking out such care. There had been concern about our committee looking at the wider system in terms of its lack of power to bring about change, but I'm pleased to report that in this last area, our scrutiny has already had a positive impact. The issue of the hostile environment in the NHS is akin to the Windrush scandal. As a result of a special pilot held in our local maternity unit, Barts Health, the trust that oversees Newham Hospital, alongside the Royal London, Mile End, Whipps Cross and St Bartholomew's, invoiced 739 women for costs of maternity care in 2018 to 19, yet just under half turned out to be eligible for free care. Our scrutiny meeting introduced the hospital to Maternity Action, a group who've worked with other trusts to try and limit the negative impact of charging. This was an issue we felt it important to address, but simultaneously we are aware that our hospital is governed by centralised NHS regulations and that to require them to do anything that brought them into conflict with these, to act ultra vires, would be a waste of committee time. It's testament to the leadership at Newham Hospital that they agreed to an additional meeting attended by myself as chair, Councillor Neil Wilson as cabinet lead, and which brought together members of Maternity Action with a number of the leadership team from Newham Hospital and Barts Health to come up with wording for recommendations that achieve the aims of addressing the core issues raised without breaching the regulations under which they have to operate. We'd like to thank the many stakeholders who contributed to this report. I commend it to overview and scrutiny and will be happy to answer any questions arising.
Thank you very much, Councillor Masters. First, thank you very much for a comprehensive report. As you mentioned, maternity care is no stranger to Newham scrutiny. We have done work on this before, but this report is very comprehensive. And like you said, it's taken its lens into other areas that we haven't previously focused. And I, for one, I know I need to make some comments, but well done for a good report. And I hope the partners, the executive and Bar Trust take note of the work that has been done, because it's a very good piece of work. And I know we should speak to officers, because in the past when reports of this kind has been presented, it does receive national attention. And I think this is one that deserves national recognition, especially given where we are now and the kind of work that has been done. So those are my opening remarks on the work done. So thank you very much. I would now open this to colleagues, but before I do so, I just need to check. Right. So before I do so, Mr. Wilson, is there anything that you need to respond to in this report?
No, obviously I share your warm words towards the chair of scrutiny, and both Mumtaz and I have been working very closely on this. Obviously, we're not in a position yet to give an executive response, and that's the due process that you will observe. But just to say, Councillor Masters kindly invited to me to that meeting with I think we have a good working relationship, the best we've had so far in the years I've been on this council, with the local hospital trust at the acute services in Newham Hospital. And it is important that we stress that quite a lot of the recommendations will need the partnership working, but that's, you know, the chair of Scrutiny in this case, Councillor Masters and I, with Mumtaz, have had regular discussions. So it's been really a very good example of cooperation in the right way for Scrutiny, but also with the relevant trust. And I think that speaks volumes for the conscientious way that it's been conducted by members. So.
Thank you. Any member? Councillor Charter.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Masters, I think it's an excellent report and just echo a lot of what's been said. Could we drill down a little bit into some of the recommendations? And the recommendation around social complexity in data, one, related to recommendation 3 about the lack of currently recorded data. Is there a correlation between the two? And the term social complexity in many situations is often used as a euphemism that nobody wants to look at, or intractable issues. Is that the case here? Sorry, and just a second question. What's how far in this? How far can we push this? And do we, I take on board what Councillor Wilson has just said, that you have a warm relationship. How can we make sure that relationship stays warm and actually becomes quite hot when it comes to addressing this issue?
Social complexity, I mean, there's a part in the papers to my report that talks about this. It's a very specific term used within the North East London system to talk about people where there's a correlation involving circumstances like experience of domestic violence, experience of FGM. So we couldn't believe it when we looked at the social complexity thing in a report they had tabled for this scrutiny, and Newham and Tower Hamlets were right down the bottom compared to, you know, Redbridge and Havering. So something's clearly gone awry there. So that was part of our question about the data, but I think it goes broader. And data was something that was picked up not just by our commission. You know, when you look at the GLA report, when you look at the national report, they don't really drill down into which particular communities it is within those very, very broad bands. And also that they're not really looking at the correlation with age either. That's a gap that they themselves have admitted. And I think that's going to be one of the really big challenges in terms of health inequalities in general, that a lot of people who could contribute so much for various reasons might not be totally comfortable sharing that data. But at the same time, it's absolutely vital we understand exactly what's going on. So that's my comment on social complexity and on data. In terms of your comment about the council, I'd like to think this report's a test case for the new integrated care system, because there are various recommendations in this that could apply to our council, but should apply to the wider system. And we need to find out, you know, how we articulate these recommendations. The role of health scrutiny in the new world of integrated care systems is still a question mark. We had Ed Hammond from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny attend, I think it was this very session, to talk about the integrated care system and ways in which health scrutiny could hold integrated care systems to account. But he acknowledged at the time that they were still waiting on guidance from the government. And I think that's still the case, that we're still waiting to see exactly how we will interact. We've already disappointingly seen representation shift from the chief executive of our integrated care system the first time they came for health scrutiny, down to I think it was the leader of participation. By the time we got into is it February or March, we were sort of looking at the integrated care system again. So for me, it's a test. You know, we will take this report to Cabinet. I'm absolutely determined we will do that, because I think it's important that other members of Cabinet are aware of the degree of issues we face in North East London. But then I think the ball goes back to the North East London system. And we need to sort of sit down with them and look at how we subsume these, because in preparation for tonight, I was sort of looking at the 5-year plan, and the content of the slide on maternity is really vague. There are no sort of specific targets there whatsoever. They have a list of programs, some of which are very exciting. But there doesn't seem to be any specific targets to address the issues that we're sort of experiencing in Newham, and that needs to change.
I'm aware that if we allow Councillor Master will speak on
Sorry about that.
maternity,
Yeah.
and maternity and health scrutiny. However, can you make your responses a bit more succinct, because we have other members? Any other member? Okay, Councillor Booker.
Again, I think it's a very good report, and I'm really pleased to hear that Newham Hospital are working so productively, and particularly around the maternity debt issue, which, you know, as well as maternity action, lots of local groups have been trying to work on. So that's really, really good. And hopefully it will be something that can be seen by other hospitals. I know that Lewisham has done some work on this as well. So it will be something that actually we're getting a bit of a groundswell of looking at maternity debt, particularly as something that's a barrier for women accessing proper maternity care, and you know, supporting the negative outcomes that unfortunately a lot of women experience. In terms of the recommendation 6, which is regarding guidance on improving access to maternity care for women affected by charging, be used as a standard reference source for those liaising with migrant women accessing maternity care in Newham. I was just wondering, in terms of from your perspective, who are those people that we can actively say this needs to be a reference for you? Are we thinking all social services? Are we thinking housing officers? You know, who is it that you're?
I think it would definitely be wider. I mean, I was sort of thinking more in terms of health workers and targeting it there, in terms of the fact that they are sort of dealing with people who might be facing debt. And that was the context in which we were sort of working with maternity action. But I'd be very happy to sort of see it used as a reference source more widely.
Because I wonder, the reason that I asked the question is whether internally we could have it as a reference document for our own services. So particularly thinking about within children's social services, for example, that social workers who have pregnant women and you know they're finding housing for, actually know to be able to direct the women to say this is what you should be expecting when you go to hospital. So whether it could actually be something within our own training for such a broad group.
I'd be very happy to see that, but that's probably a question I should throw to the executive on the opposite benches. How would you feel about that?
Do you want me to respond?
Yes, if you can.
Yeah, you know, can I also just in relation to Councillor Cheddar's point, just say that I am the Vice Chair of the North East London Health and Care Partnership. So we're quite well represented, and in a pre-meeting this afternoon, not this report, because it's not in my remit to talk about this report. It's clearly at the moment within this committee. But we were talking along the lines about dissemination of good practice. And I personally think that, you know, Councillor Booker made reference to Lewisham maternity services. I think that if integration is really going to work, we do have to talk about the dissemination of good practice, or where there is bad practice, as there has been, as you know, Chair, in the past within this particular service provision for women, that we actually highlight that, because that's what integration should be about. But I share the one council approach that I think Councillor Booker was indicating, and I'm sure we'll take that back. But that's for us to mull over when we a detailed response. As there's so much work in here, I think it deserves quite a detailed response when we get to seeing it.
Cabinet.
Good. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, I will bring in Councillor Leslie on screen.
Councillor Leslie, is there? any-
for this.
If only I wasn't councillor chair.
I am promoting you.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
I would appreciate that vote.
Okay, for the viewing public, that was an error on my part. Paul is a co-opted member of this committee and not the councillor. Okay. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. So clearly I'm flabbergasted by the data, especially in terms of the worsening health and maternity outcomes for Black women, which I'm questioning. And I guess the question for me is, within the research, were you able to cite specific cases of racism or discrimination in the service itself being systematically an integral part of how Black women experience health services? And if you were, and you nodded, Susan, so I take that as yes, given what we're asking of the Met in particular and the fire brigade and everyone else, in terms of the recommendations, can we look at those in terms of that robust root and branch transformation that we're asking of those statutory partners to take place in terms of the health outcomes and health structures that Black women experience and other minority groups experience when going through the maternity system? It's just, if we don't provide that kind of steer, then I fear that the worst health outcomes will continue for future generations. And I guess the last point for me before you come back in is the average age group speaks about, you know, women in their 30s, and I'm questioning whether more work needs to be done on both sides, where education around maternity and antenatal services goes in at school level right throughout, so that women can be better prepared to A, identify the signs when they're not getting the right services, but B, do everything they possibly can to ensure that we reduce that level of stillbirth, and also fight for better, you know, that women advocate for better treatment for themselves.
I think in terms of what you were saying about whether the committee encountered experiences of actual racism, I think in the literature we read in advance of the meeting, we did. In terms of the report tabled by Healthwatch, which had, you know, the broadest possible spread of experiences, some very good, some bad, we did come across some examples of racism. I mean, one that's commonly cited is a belief that people from of African or Caribbean heritage communities have higher thresholds for pain. And we came across one example in the Healthwatch report of somebody who felt that she'd been treated in that way, and that was really disturbing. In terms of, I think you were talking about the age thing. I think that's a very fair point. And I was, you know, before coming here, I was sort of looking at the background information again, sort of preparing myself for questions. And it's true that Newham women tend to give birth later than women in other boroughs in North East London. So that there is that additional time to sort of share messages. And I think possibly we weren't strong enough in terms of training to appreciate different cultures. This is one of the recommendations that the Women and Equalities Commission came back with. That I think, you know, I was looking at that and thinking, oh, maybe we missed a trick there. And, you know, that's something that needs to go in as well. And then we didn't stress it enough, but it is in the report. We were focusing on things that weren't being done in terms of co-production of services. You know, you've got the Maternity Voices Partnership, which is working very closely with maternity services at Newham. But, you know, having those voices actually co-design services going forward, I think it's really important, and we need to continue to monitor it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Masters, in terms of the disparity in the Black women facing with compared to their white counterpart, did you get the impression that Bart's Trust was taking this seriously in terms of the maternity deaths, etc.? You get the impression of this piece of work that they are taking this seriously and going to be doing something about it?
I'd say so, absolutely. I mean, they really did bend over backwards to work for us to an extent that I've not seen to the same extent in the past. I mean, the interesting thing is just to make you aware, the data that we shared on, say, things like the hostile environment, that is actual BART's data. That isn't data that's come in from other sources. So they've been transparent about having an issue, but they haven't always looked like they have appreciated the seriousness of that. And I think, you know, we've seen a real change in that respect. And the fact that they're bringing their overseas charging report to the scrutiny is, but I mean, I think the issues we're talking about, they're far wider system issues. You can't take the hospital in isolation. That was the whole point of our investigation, that it is part of a much wider set of circumstances, and it's for the system to own that. And it's the system at the moment that lacks the refinement of data, lacks the targets, and that's where we need to apply pressure going forward.
Yeah, I agree. It's a wider, because we know nationally that what you say happening in Newham, happening not in a national context.
But even in the local system, I mean, I'm talking about, you know, within the North East London integrated care system, because they're the ones sort of setting the targets for all of this.
And I just want to, because these are things that we've spoken about, these are historical things that happened, and we know about them. And you mentioned it again, so it's not new to us hearing that. The thing is what's being done. And that's why I'm asking if you get the impression that they're going to take it seriously, and that the real improvements are going to be made regarding this. I want to come in with, is your question, Councillor Booker, related to this?
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
It was sort of feeling as though, do you feel this, or is it just something that I feel kind of without necessarily having the evidence? But it almost feels a bit, as Paul was saying, you know, looking at the Met and the fire brigade and all of those, that actually perhaps part of the reason, and it's a really good thing for us to kind of hook onto, is that that these things are becoming the systematic and systemic racism within systems is something that we are understanding, or at least bringing to light more. So there has been decades of people shouting about this, and there's been organisations saying things about this, but actually perhaps this is the time for the hospitals as well to say, okay, well, actually, how are our systems also perpetuating disproportionality in outcomes and things like that? And it's helpful for other large organisations to be also looking at that at the same time.
I think you're right. I mean, this is the first part of a report that, if I come back, unless it gets picked up by the next chair, will hopefully be coming in the next term, which will draw together the themes across the rest of the areas we looked at. And you had the same issues coming up. You know, mental health, again, it's something that's been known about for years, but nobody has really done anything that hasn't been, you know, a short-term pilot with limited funding. And I agree that there has to be a holding to account the system. And to be fair, we're talking about a new integrated care system that is just putting together its first 5-year plan. So in a sense, it's kind of difficult to expect too much at this early stage. But I think for health scrutiny, we need to absolutely hold the system to account across the board going forward,
Okay.
and make sure that this issue is specifically targeted across all the different areas of health at all levels of the system.
Thank you. On the back of this is question, and you mentioned in your introduction, you're keen on the service or part of it to the Windrush scandal. And that is a strong position to take. Can you elaborate?
Because it's exactly the same kind of situation. You had people who were totally entitled to free NHS treatment, who were approached and maybe didn't have the papers to hand. So in a situation where they were already under stress, where they were vulnerable, doubly vulnerable in many cases. They found themselves facing enormous charges for healthcare. And I know Councillor McAlmont, in a previous scrutiny, we looked at charging and they were saying, oh, no, we don't charge up front. And you had a specific example of somebody within your own network who'd experienced that. So that's the level, basically, that it's people who are entitled in the same way that the Windrush generation were fully entitled to be treated as British citizens because they didn't have the paperwork. That wasn't respected, and it's the same with hospital charging.
Okay, yes, and I did need to explore that a bit more. And you mentioned myself. I have had, and I do declare an interest at this stage, for some experience of a relative of mine who turned up at Newham General for maternity care, and she wasn't offered that care, and she was pushed around until she called me, and I had to take out my credit card, my debit card, and pay, because obviously I was arguing national health is free at the point of use, blah, blah, blah. Why do you want to charge? And if the person doesn't have money, she was in pain. However, I took my card out. I paid the £500 and something at the time, and she got seen. And I thought that, and this is why I raised at previous meeting, and I thought that was a scandal because obviously I didn't want to push it to the extent of not paying to see what would happen if the person was in distress. But at the time you had that money, then what would have happened? We don't know because I never pushed it to that extent. Councillor Higgins.
Thank you for the report, Councillor Masters, and to the whole Scrutiny Commission. I appreciate that this report is not specific. It is not solely focused on charging and the effects of charging, but more on the inequalities within the whole system. But I am concerned that charging, affects different demographics differently, obviously, because of who is affected by charging. During the Commission's research, did you find any evidence that people were not presenting for care with concerns due to fear of charging, whether those fears were founded or not, i.e. they may have been eligible for care, but for reasons believed that they weren't, and what the impact of that might have been on results and outcomes?
We did. I mean, that was part of Maternity Action sort of evidence of what they've seen in their reports. So, I mean, that was why it was a sort of particular concern to us. And, I was talking about needing better data, but, if people are afraid of facing charging, then again, they're not going to sort of help sort of build that data picture that we need. But yes, there is solid evidence of people sort of not seeking that level of support. And obviously it's really important that women have that support there as they go through their pregnancy.
Yeah, thank you. Go on.
Chair, so thank you for that answer. That's really helpful. This is connected to recommendation 12, which talks about our Newham money being recommended the work with the maternity services to ensure mothers have access to all the sources of funding they're entitled to. Is there an advocacy role within our Newham money for making sure that people know which services they're entitled to without charging, if you know what I mean?
That's a completely separate thing. I mean, our Newham money is a Newham service that's available to residents. So it wasn't part of what we were looking at. We were talking specifically about NHS services. I mean, as a council, we've done a lot of work around supporting people who are no recourse funds, particularly over the course of coming out through the sort of pandemic. So I was sort of thinking more in terms of sort of accessing NHS sort of health services.
Okay, thank you. I do recognize Councillor Rahman and Councillor Charter, and they're going to be the last two unless I haven't seen them yet, so they're going to be the last two. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for your very hardworking, I would say, the committee has done scrutiny and very nice report. And you have acknowledged the difficulties that migrant women are facing, which is maternity action 2018, they have released a report. And recommendation was that immediately to suspend the charge. And here still we actually facing that our residents are being forced by the hospitals to pay for the service that they use for that hospital. So as you mentioned that what the inability or the commission can be looking into it and see how that can be stopped and what the council can offer to those families.
I think the worry, part of the reason I want to ring fence the voluntary sector for a certain amount of money is they're not bound by the same regulations as local authorities, as the NHS. So, and also they tend to have deeper reach into communities because they're known within those communities as kind of safe spaces for people. And they're more flexible in terms of the levels of support they can give as well. So that's part of the reason that particular sort of recommendation was sort of put in, just to sort of cater for those sort of situations. Sorry, what was the rest of your
recommendation? Been using it? Is that been implementing it? If it's not, then why? If is that recommendation is implemented, then why our hospitals been forced to charge our residents?
We cannot. The problem we have is the NHS is a national body. Even though we're talking about integrated care systems at a North East London level, the regulations are laid down by the NHS, which is a national body. What we can do, and I've worked with Stephen Timms a lot on this issue in the past, is lobby central government. And so, you know, that's something I've done as an individual, and it's something we could maybe look at doing through in another place.
That's something that cabinet member Wilson can be looking into it, and as is the chair of the national the East London Health Board.
But it's still not national. That's the difficulty. Our integrated care system cannot unilaterally decide to stop charging. That's set by the NHS at the national level. So we would need to lobby central government through Stephen Timms to have that addressed, which is something I've done on a personal level. And I've supported other local organisations that are campaigning on that level. And it's something that, you know, as members, we might want to look at in another place.
Do you want us to come in on the campaigning issues? Just to say that both Mumtaz and my deputy colleague wants to come in on this as well, is that we, in the majority programme that is now the corporate plan, that the whole of the majority group stood on now is commitment for a campaigning council, and I'm sure opposition as well would join in on national campaigning. The chair of the relevant scrutiny committee is absolutely right. We've had Marmot coming to address full council. We've had a whole series of good relationships throughout both of our local MPs and in fact the other partners in London over this. But it is an uphill struggle with two government departments who are not, today this discussion came up in terms of the Home Office, not even talking to the Department of Health. And the Home Office has a different agenda, which is shorthand hostile environment. And the NHS has a more caring approach, but is still top-down driven. And even this integrated care partnership has outcomes that are only just recently been changed again to minimise this top-down criticism that we've already fed back. But that's on the campaigning things. I'm just supporting the chair, but it is not to lose sight of the very important role that I think local authorities do have. And I think Mumtaz wants to just come in on that one. Sorry.
So, if I can just.
Yeah.
So I was going to mention the Marmot report, which a lot of the stuff that we've been thinking about over the years, it's been put together in a report, and I guess that does help us to kind of campaign for better outcomes. Personally, Councillor Rahman, I mean, this is an area that I've shown interest for some time now. And I don't know if you remember, Councillor Masters, that I did bring a motion on this. So, you know, this is a very detailed report. There are recommendations that we need to work on. And I would like to personally be involved in some of the implementation because, you know, it's an area that I am very passionate about. And it's an area where women, migrant women, women from, a country that I come from, register their pregnancy far later than, you know, some of the other countries, settlers here. And I feel these are areas I know mentioned about education. It's a bigger picture that we need to put the puzzle together and be able to work with other agencies and as a local authority, as one council, be able to kind of work on the recommendation that's been put in this report. So I'm certainly wanting to see the implementation that you have.
Okay, I do want to conclude this item. I said that Councillor Charles was going to be the last speaker. However, I haven't given Councillor Hudson any opportunity. So they're going to be the two last speakers because we do need to move on. Okay. So are you ceding your time to Councillor Hudson?
He's not had a go, so I was trying.
Okay, she's ceded to you. So Councillor Hudson.
Thank you very much for the report, Susan. Comprehensive. On recommendation 9 about additional funding for the voluntary sector, what about advocacy support?
That would be part of that. Because this is exactly what they do brilliantly.
Yeah, because what really does strike me, certainly about dealing with the public sector, be it local authorities or health, if you're middle class and articulate and you see something that you're not particularly happy with, you can be very articulate and say something isn't working. Broadly, what we're talking about are working class people with limited income who don't know how the system works, and certainly some form of advocacy support for people so that they can deal with where there is service failure. It will be money well spent.
I agree.
Okay. Councillor Charles.
3 quick points, and it's segues neatly on with Councillor Hudson's last point. In terms of the maternity action did a pilot, I think it was up in Preston, on health justice and making sure that that very piece of advocacy work was embedded in health settings. And I think that's a model that if we want to progress some of these recommendations, that would be well worth looking at. My second point was around data. So going back to that whole piece, I get the impression from your report that data may not be collected in the most robust manner that it needs to be. But in addition to the main protected characteristics, I don't know if the health already does this, but do they have provision to monitor social economic inequality? Because obviously a lot of this is about financial support as well. And if we can get that data up front, I think that would be, and obviously the as a reference point for that as well. So I think we can encourage health to access that. That would be helpful. My final point is we are a borough of sanctuary as well. And maybe we can use that context in terms of how we campaign. And I think it is important to remember that in the context of maternity care, an undischarged debt from the NHS, that somebody cannot renew their immigration application. So the wider context of this, and I think it is worth Newham money understanding this, is when they're prioritising debt, they'll have to understand that a person's immigration status is on the line unless this is done as well.
Yeah.
My point is direct on what Councillor Childs.
To be short this second, briefly.
So I can't remember where in the report it is, but it's mentioned that the health service is providing a home office with, the names of people who present for care. It was mentioned on a previous agenda item at a previous meeting that we were worried about the effect of that for immigration enforcement and whether that detail was being used. Has that been, I know it's not strictly related to the work of this report, but was that looked into at all? Because that phrase jumped out to me as incredibly concerning, being provided to the Home Office.
Yes, I mean, again, the problem we've got is that's a kind of national arrangement. So it's something that we can raise in a different space and we can campaign on. But from a point of view of what we were looking at specifically,
But like, as a council, can we monitor these people to make sure, like, to watch what's happening to them? Is the Home Office coming in and raiding and taking them away afterwards, as we've seen happen in other places?
Chair, can I come in on this just quickly, because I did lead the national legal action against this in the previous role. And I think what Councillor Masters is saying is it's really difficult. Any further monitoring that we did of this could catch us out as a local authority in terms of having to support as well. There has been several attempts, and Liberty and the Migrant Rights Network took the last legal challenge on trying to present a firewall between the NHS and health. It's failed successively. So I think there is a danger there. The only caveat to that is that later on this year, there is due to be a new protocol which will allow migrant women to have a firewall when they report to the police issues of domestic abuse. There may be synergy from that to actually then follow on. And I'm happy to pick that up separately.
and that's been another failing, hasn't it, of charging, because if you're a victim of domestic abuse, that completely changes your rights. And that's been something that hasn't been properly sort of picked up by the NHS.
Okay, so I must conclude here. Thank you very much. So can I now the formal bit of this? I move that the maternity care and health inequality scrutiny report be agreed and submitted to Cabinet and the NHS partner organization requesting an executive response. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. I now move on to our next item, which is item 6. The purpose of this item is to consider the mayor's letter of response to the committee concern on the intervention of the help sex workers in Newham. Following previous consideration of this issue, I wrote as chair of the Ovarian Scrutiny Committee to summarize some of the main concerns of the committee on this issue to the mayor. The mayor has then responded both by letter and the mayor letter of reply has been circulated. I will formally invite the cabinet member for health and other social care, Councillor Wilson, to briefly update the committee on the progress on this issue and then open the questions. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks very much. And we have apologies for interim director Jason Strelitz, but I have officer support if they're online, yes, from Shah, from me, Fiona, and I think Reid was trying to join us. So the officers from a technical perspective will be here to answer questions. If I just do a quick overview of where we've reached, Chair, is that?
Yeah, that's perfectly in order.
All members would have been circulated with a statement that was issued to the press and also before doing so to the relevant scrutiny committee itself over the issues regarding sex workers on a street level. And I'm stressing that because that's pertinent to what we're now pivoting towards in terms of a public health approach. And I did mention that at the relevant scrutiny commission, and we were exercised to get that press release out so that because of the municipal year and trying to be in accordance with the very real deliberations to make certain that we got our messages across. And so I welcome this next opportunity to say where we've got to. So I hope all members of council are now aware that we're taking a public approach a public health approach to a sex working strategy. If we take a public health approach, that does mean our integral partners, based on the meme, which has been in existence now for 6 years, that's make every adult matter. A key partner is the Metropolitan Police Service. So it shouldn't be a sort of false dichotomy between the role of the police within these organisations of perceptions by our residents, or worse, antisocial behaviour, which is real and or apparent, or the perceptions. So we're now taking a public health approach to a sex working strategy. We are looking at all aspects of sex working. That is street-based, which causes often concerns for our residents, and is not, and I keep stressing this everywhere I go, is not confined to one gender or one location within the London Borough of Newham, or one segment of our very diverse community, or anything else. So it is so complex. We are looking now at street-based, off-street and technology app-based sex working. Because I know there's been references in this committee, and the letter does address this, that things have moved on since the last time we rightly looked at this because of the concern of residents. It's like, if I can take the analogy, and I hope members will indulge me on this, we do have a real issue of gambling addictions, but most gambling addiction is not in high street betting offices. It's online, and there are some real mental health as well as financial problems, and people have, it comes up in our domestic abuse strategy, it comes up all over. Now, we will be looking at the impacts of sex work on residents. I have to stress this to this committee, and this is being broadcast live because I know it. We live in a social media age where people will often take the messaging that they want to receive rather than what's actually we are doing. We will be looking at the impacts of sex work on residents. Sex workers who are residents themselves in many cases, and the residents' impact by antisocial behaviour as a result of that sex work. We will be conducting a needs assessment. Now, to conduct a needs assessment is to actually make certain that we look at our own, and it's parallel to the discussion we've just had regarding our partner organisations. Clearly, a lot of predominantly women, but there are all genders, and specific reference to our partner sources of quantitative data. Data came up in the last discussion. Data is very important. Data sharing protocols, and with the right trust on all agencies, including the Metropolitan Police and including, obviously, the very people who are sex working. So that's a needs assessment, and we'll be doing qualitative work with residents. That is an important integral part of the needs assessment. There will also be an evidence review of the national and international evidence of what works and considering how this might be applied to Newham. I was on a webinar last week together with a whole load of other organisations. I think it's important that Mumtaz and I, as well as the officers concerned, apply as much models of good practice elsewhere and indeed internationally. Newham has its very diverse approach, and what I was reassured on that conference last week, that we are on the right track. It doesn't mean to say that we are going to reach a destination just like that, because if we were to do it quickly, we couldn't be taking the one council approach. We're looking at issues and solutions and involving key partners. That includes representatives of the street workers that we've already been in meetings with, representatives from higher education institutions that we can help do the research, people with lived experience, people who are trying to exit from sex work, people who have not much choice in sex work, and the residents. But to preempt this work by saying, what are we doing like tomorrow, is quite dangerous. What is reassuring, and I've got reassurance, and I hope I can stress this not strongly enough, is that no work is being stopped. Our community-enabled outreach team from the partners in the Metropolitan Police who have dedicated training in this area are still working with sex workers. What we need to establish, though, is that we do have the trust of people involved in this particular activity, and whether they have choice or not, it's a non-judgmental approach. It is about making certain that people are safe, either as residents or the people who are on the street, or online, which is even more hidden dangers very often. Those who are exploited, those who are actually having their lives quite often disturbed, either as residents or themselves. And we shouldn't ignore the fact that we're in the One Council approach. I think I stressed this last time, Chair, that this is not a public health department issue, it's a public health approach. So we are looking at children's services, because a lot of the women do have the history of being either, looked after children. They have had domestic abuse issues, which is covered in our domestic abuse strategy. We're working closely with children's services and housing services. Some people are in the refugee and asylum seeking category, some are rough sleeping, all of those issues. So it's got to be a One Council approach. When we say public health, it means that it's a holistic approach, like I've said before. Shall I stop at that point and then move to question?
Thank you. Seeing two members, Councillor Booker and against, and Charter and Hudson. In that order.
Before I ask a question about it, could you just explain the online and street? So just why within this strategy are we looking at those two specifically? Because you mentioned online and street sex work. So why are we looking at online and street sex work as opposed to having a strategy that is just online or just street sex work or sex work in the broader sense, which is...
The press release rightly talked about a sex working strategy. And my analogy with gambling was that a lot of the activity is not on the street. It is also included online. And there are dangers, particularly for people who are in this industry, associated with apps, with all sorts of issues around their health, their checks, their being known or being exploited even. So it's not an either or, it's both and.
No, so I understood that. So I suppose...
Sex work strategy, it's not saying that sex work on the street is no longer important. It's trying to be as realistic and as up to date because the technology has moved on since.
So I suppose then my question is, why are we not looking at all sex work? Because it isn't only street and online. That's not the entirety of sex work. So if we're having a sex work strategy, you'd have thought that we would have all sex work. So that would include within homes and within sort of group homes as well, whether it's within brothels, there'd be all sorts of...
Oh yes, I wasn't excluding those. Sorry, I took that as sorry, I was being, because we're responding to a letter that you rightly
Sorry, but there was actually a part that bit was going on to. Sorry, do you mind if I just say that before you finish? Which is that how is our online strategy? How do we ensure that that's to do with local priorities? Because online doesn't have a locality necessarily. So are you looking at things that specifically target it at something that makes the online a local issue? Or how are we... I don't understand how we look at online and in person at the same time within one strategy. So if you could explain how that can be one strategy.
I'm going to bring in Simon Reid, who is leading on this on behalf of the Directorate. But my initial response as a politician is that it was a bit like the domestic abuse strategy. That has got about 5 different areas to it. They are often interrelated. They are not necessarily all about, because of the positions of people removed from dangerous locations. They're out of the borough, but they're still our responsibility because they're still our residents. So it's a difficult one to answer because I wish I hadn't said online now, in a sense. That was just an illustration of how it's got to be wide and it needs assessment. But I think Simon may have a better answer if that's not satisfactory to Councillor Booker.
Okay, can I Simon, before you come in, can I say I'm open to conclude this agenda item by 8:30? So that's 20 minutes time. So Simon, can you answer the question, but answer it very concisely so that we get what you're saying in a short space of time? And for the question is, if we do the same, so the more we can get in 20 minutes, the better for us. Simon.
I'll keep it brief, Chair. Thank you. Definitely won't take up 20 minutes with my answer. I think the important thing to state here, and going back to what we said, is we need to do a needs assessment. Like the honest truth is, We need to understand sex working in all of its parts, in all of the parts of the borough, before we can answer any questions. I think you asked really good questions, and I don't think we can answer them because we haven't done the needs assessment to understand how many people are sex working, the demographics of those who are sex working, how the changes to housing and cost of living and Brexit and all of these other things have impacted on sex working. And we have a huge technological leap that's taking place at the moment in terms of how that kind of influences the ability to access sex workers. So we need to do the needs assessment. That is our first step. That is our focus.
Thank you. Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chair. I think the first thing that I wanted to say was actually thank you to the administration for not going ahead with the public space protection order. The response to that from the community made it very clear that there was serious fears about the safety of women if that had gone ahead. And it's good that it has been listened to. There has been a loss of trust though, and that is trust that is vital to the support services provided to sex workers. It's hard to get them to trust you when you've just proposed not further criminalisation of them specifically, but further criminalisation of spaces around them and the risk that creates for them. So I want to make sure that the council, the administration is aware of the breach of trust that is happening, and that there will have to be a repairing of that trust and the impact that that has on support services. I also, during the response to the PSPO, it came up that quite a lot of sex workers were victims of violence from the police themselves. There was a report showing 40% of East London sex workers have been victims of violence from the police. And that was shocking. And I want to make sure that the council continues to be aware of that, and then that feeds into the work of the council, because it's impossible to build trust with the state as a single entity. Of course, it's multiple organizations if people feel victims of that state. And I just wanted to check that that was on your mind and part will be feeding into the strategy.
Both Mumtaz and I and other relevant members of the cabinet, as deputy cabinet, the executive and the mayor, are working hard to make certain that we are getting the messages across both to our residents that the behaviours or otherwise, it's like it was in a previous discussion, around the actions of police in this regard do need to be acknowledged and owned by our partner organisations. It's a bit like we had in the previous discussion regarding the acute care services provided at our local hospital. If we're in partnership and if we are making every adult matter in this piece of work, then it should be the accountability to that, the body, which, as you say, people don't segment as much as we might in our elected roles. It is frustrating to not give a more straightforward answer, but I'm conscious of the fact that we are going at a very initial stage with the relevant cabinet leads for crime and community safety, as well as housing, as well as children's services, to make certain that, as Simon said, we're at initial stages about finding out what the actual scale of the issue is, so a needs assessment to then feed in to a wider piece of work. And from the start, to try and encourage that rebuilding of trust, if that's necessary in some cases, with not just the people involved in sex work industry or trade or whatever we wish to label it. I prefer to say just sex working, but others may have connotations. But to even get the language right so that people aren't talking about prostitution or they're not doing judgmental labeling.
I think it's just when it, and I appreciate what you've just said, I think it's just when it comes to designing this needs assessment, for you to be able to hope to get accurate information, there has to be an understanding of where we're starting from a trust perspective, and the very horrible experiences of many people at the hands of the police. And then when you see, the council proposing a PSPO, that's gone now though, but people, that just feeds into the existing lack of trust.
Can I bring in officers? Because I did say that we're going to look at people with experience as residents, but also those with lived experience as sex workers.
No, I didn't give you permission to bring in officers yet because I'm just gauging
Right, how many people want to come in? That's fine.
Yeah, I'm just gauging how many people.
Very important.
Simon, it seems like you are the officer.
No, that's why I was directing which officers I.
Okay, because I see Simon has his hands up. So which officer you intended to bring in?
Start with Simon.
Okay, Simon, you have only 1 minute to respond. I'm sorry. You will be the only officer, then we move on.
Okay, I will do it in a minute. I look back to our rough sleeping experience. I think it had a similar beginning. I think it was a rocky road. I think there were similar things proposed prior to Adults in Health taking on that work. And we approached it with care and compassion. We recognized some of the errors of the past and we developed an approach with residents, with those with lived experience, which has dramatically worked. The issue was particularly focused on Stratford Mall, but it was it was a full borough issue, and we had developed a full borough strategy based on a needs assessment. So we will approach it in the same way.
We just have to make sure the needs assessment is designed with this in mind.
Completely, 100%. Completely agree.
Made it fully exhaustive time and even took more. Got your charter.
Thank you. So a couple of points. 3 points. So the first point about slightly following on from Councillor Higgins, the issue around trust. I think we need to remember that actually the interface with a lot of these sex workers may actually be charities which have a softer approach with have a trust approach. I totally agree, Councillor Wilson. We can tend to live in a vacuum as councillors to what the world out there is thinking. I think we have to be very careful about how we phrase things, but we don't add fuel to the fire. So that's one thing. But going on to the point about misogyny, can you, in the needs assessment, also assure or make a statement that actually allows us to understand that any misogyny within or harassment or misconduct within the Metropolitan Police and within the council will be taken seriously, and that there are safe routes for women who are, or anybody who's involved in the consultation process, to report that. So I think that's a critical way of also gauging the extent of the problems. And my final 2 points was the national referral mechanism, we know, is under review, and we already know it's failing in lots of ways. So lots of trafficked individuals will be affected by this as well. What can we do, either as a campaigning council or in whatever way, to factor in the changing structure of the national referral mechanism to actually accommodate some of the work? And my very final point, Chair, is the Mayor, in her very lengthy letter and response, talks about future proofing or refers to future proofing. Are you psychic? How are you going to do that?
Can you make the specific the page one where it says future proofing?
3-6.
Pardon? It's very difficult because we've got sounds here coming on one ear and.
But I've seen, I know Councillor Wilson wants to come in, and I've seen Fiona put her hands up. I know there's a lot of questions there. So Councillor Wilson, between yourself and.
I'll just, Fiona, then I'll pick up the campaigning, because I don't think it's right to put officers on the spot about campaigning issues.
Yeah.
That's and I will answer that one, and also the one from the Mayor, because she's a politician as well.
Okay, so if I can put no more than 5 minutes to deal with all of Councillor Charter's question, because that's a lot, yeah.
Fiona on the first one, the non-political.
So I think what I wanted to come back on was what was being said about protecting the some of the sex workers that we might be speaking with. We'll follow the same sort of strategy that we did when we did the domestic abuse strategy. We are not suggesting for a moment that sex workers are in the same room as some people who may, and this might also include other residents, may be misogynistic or may be threatening towards them. We will put in support for sex workers who are helping us with the needs assessment, the same way that we do with the domestic abuse strategy. There were counsellors available to people who felt triggered or who needed further support. And Robbie is here today from Hestia. They will also be offering support in terms of the sex work programme. We will be operating this in line with the principles of the domestic abuse strategy, which is to listen, to not doubt, and to take people's experiences as they express them, not to question the veracity of those experiences. So absolutely, we'll be working in that values-based way, in the same way that we did when we developed the domestic abuse strategy. I think I've only answered part of the question, but that was the bit that I felt able to give a response to.
And just very briefly, Chair, because I know I'm conscious of time, we will obviously be coming back. We've hit a nothing in terms of where we're trying to develop this. Future proofing is a reference in the letter to make certain that we don't, because so often, I mean, I've been on this council long enough, we've either done strategies that have grown, old and not been revised enough, or we've said that, well, we've done it and, or we revise them too often. This is why I think we're all stressing, Simon, myself, Mumtaz, we're at very early stages. We need to do it correctly with a needs assessment. But that's where I don't want to go into a cul-de-sac over the online thing. That was illustrative of how the actual issues we're dealing with could be changing. And that's why the crucial trust of those involved in sex work from the start, or restored trust, to take Councillor Higgins' point, along the lines that's suggested on what we've done so far, is to make certain that it is something that we don't keep having to change as, sort of every 2 minutes. Does that make sense? Future proofing. It's about review. I know we keep going back to rough sleeping or domestic abuse strategy. I've taken those with Mumtaz through cabinet members have been reassured that it's been co-produced and co-designed, but it's also got review citation in there. It is not, that's it.
Wilson, I'm just trying to save you pain later on. If something happens that, like COVID, that isn't predicted, then isn't it better just to go heavy on the review as opposed to future proofing? There's always inevitably that happens.
Yeah. What is certain in life? And it's that sort of question. I think we'll have to leave that as a philosophical debate.
Okay, Councillor Austin.
Just a couple of questions.
Right.
What specific outcomes will we see in the next year? So in essence, the council and the executive have abandoned the PS public space approach. You're going down a public health approach. So what percentage, from the point of view of residents, for some strange reason, we knock on people's doors and people have conversations with us, what specific percentage reduction will we see in 12 months' time and in 24 months' time? Specific.
I refer you to the answer I gave earlier, that we're at the initial stages of a needs assessment. We had this debate, which I thought developed into a cul-de-sac last time. If you want specific outcomes, you're not going to be having them at this stage. I think I think I'm speaking on behalf of the officers as well on that. We do not wish to be tied to specific outcomes, and we're quite clearly trying to get this correct. And we don't even know the scale of the issue. That's why we do need a needs assessment. So
at least, Councillor Austin, based on what Simon said, that because they don't understand the scale of the issue, and at least that is a frank admission.
Sorry, Chair, I want to clarify. I didn't say we didn't understand the scale. We don't know the scale.
Okay. They don't yet know the scale of the problem, although we have had work being done. But this, I suppose, is a fresh approach. So hopefully, when can we get to know the scale then, Councillor Wilson?
What would your suggestion be, Simon? I'm struggling here because, again, we are down to reductionist philosophy where it's about numbers. And this is not an easy issue to give you numbers when we don't.
I'm asking for numbers. What you're saying, Simon said there's a needs assessment, which we took on board. You were saying that we don't yet know the scale. So it's quite okay and legitimate for this commission to ask, when can we get our answer to the scale of the problem?
No, that's not what the councillor asked. He wanted outcomes.
Okay, well, I'm asking him. I chair the overview. I'm asking the question. When would we know?
Have we got
the needs assessment and strategy will be produced over this financial year.
Yeah.
That will allow us to benchmark where we are and be able to set targets and outcomes for the future. We can't answer the questions you're posing at the moment because we haven't done the work.
Okay, so we know that it's this financial year. So we have until March of next year.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Hudson. Okay. Councillor Booker.
As we haven't quite got to past, just two last things from me. Did you want to have a go?
No, Councillor Booker, you go, and then
It's not, I mean,
yeah, and then I bring in Councillor Masters. It's okay.
no, it's fine. I indicated ages ago, but I think to be fair, Councillor Calmont is probably fairly distributing the meeting, so.
Thank you, Councillor.
I did mention about possible violence and things from residents towards sex workers. And one of the issues that I know that as a Little Ilford as a Little Ilford councillor that we've had on our board between Little Ilford and Manor Park about last Christmas was a rise in some vigilantism. And so I was wanting to find out, are you putting extra, so within the status quo, you know, you said there's going to be a status quo, we're going to keep all of the things. Are we actually attributing anything extra to ensure safety, particularly because people feel almost as though doing the consultations was a slight placating, and now if people are feeling actually my voice hasn't been heard, I might just go on the street and decide to do something myself. Because we've seen that a little bit last year anyway, is that something we're particularly focusing on to ensure people are safe? And sorry, thanks. And the other thing is that I think that it would be really good, and if the chair is happy for it, if we could be involved really at these beginning stages in terms of pre-decision scrutiny on this strategy, because I think it's something that, you know, if we get through a full year and then there's still issues that we would want to bring back, actually that's going to just prolong the whole process. And so if we can be involved in those early stages of the strategy, I think it would be really useful for the whole cycle.
And I take those quickly in reverse order. Yes, a very valuable contribution of pre-scrutiny in terms of shaping, because I would like to make certain that we've got the reassurance, both of residents and also the very sex workers themselves, that there's safety issues. But we are on that one, Simon, working with our partner organisations, and as Robbie's also on the call, and I've already mentioned dedicated, you know, neighbourhood policing. But Simon.
Yes, we're working with the community safety team to work out what measures can be delivered in the short term whilst we're doing this work. There was an awful lot of feedback through the consultation, and some of that is potentially still actionable. But I just kind of reaffirm the point, where we do things together, we tend to have a better impact. And certainly we'd be looking for scrutiny as we develop the needs assessment and our proposals to inform that. It makes sense to me. We do things better when we do it together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Masters.
It's just about the needs assessment, because it kind of feels that when we need a needs assessment, it's not there. And I'm just wondering whether the needs assessment is bound into a rigid procurement cycle, or whether it's actually sort of driven by the need for a needs assessment, which is what you'd hope. Because I know, you know, we've been looking at this particular issue for quite a number of years now. So I'm just wondering why it feels like this needs assessment is only just being done, when it kind of feels that it should be a kind of ongoing process where you're kind of monitoring and you're learning and you're kind of adapting. It just feels very, very clunky that, you know, every few years we have a brand new needs assessment, and it doesn't feel like we should be reinventing the wheel here.
Technology issue, I'm going to keep labouring. We've had the impact of Brexit. We've had the impact of dispersal effects from various other neighbouring boroughs who have taken a different strategy. We've had a world pandemic, and we've had, you know, in some of our needs assessments, we have failed to actually have lived experience, both a resident voice, which is genuine, a resident voice in terms of the residents affected by real antisocial behaviour issues along the lines about, you know, which Councillor Booker was alluding to, or the lived experience of the very people involved in sex work.
Long to get this stage.
I can only talk from when I took over this. Yeah, you're asking me to talk about the past. It was a bit like when I was brought to this committee last time. It was quite interesting that it was a comparison with 2012. You know, you could argue the same if I put the question back to you, Councillor Masters, about why have we had another need for a review of maternity services? We're now in 2023. We are, and I'm not going to say this stupid phrase, we are where we are, but you know, this is to get it. I'm not saying we're going to get it all right. I don't want to pretend that everything's going to be 100% straightforward, but it's terms of getting the demographic, getting the information, getting qualitative reviews of residents as well as quantitative data, which is real and shared under a make every adult matter approach with all the partners involving the police and all the other council departments. I would argue that has not happened before. And that is why the needs assessment is more complex, but is more granular than ever before.
Okay.
Will it become more of a rolling process going forward with that?
It's a bit that, I think I was trying to answer that in relation to a previous question. The domestic abuse strategy, we have regular portfolio meetings on it, so that we are monitoring it before the cabinet do, and then we would like scrutiny, you know, in your various roles to look at it as well. So it's not left on the shelf. That was my sort of clumsy way of saying it may look clunky, but it's not leaving it as some sort of big exercise that's going to delay. It's to make certain it's informed so that then we have the proper policy review, implementation and evaluation stage. And I do welcome, as I think officers would, the idea of getting it right so that we don't have the repeat of some of the issues that we've had, which have been about perception and the way certain things have been handled.
Councillor Wilson, I know it at one stage of your response to Councillor Masters, you said you can only answer when you took over. The executive hasn't changed. And when you come here as an executive member, we expect that if a question is asked, because the executive hasn't changed, the question.
But I'll quote
G4
when I was.
Please, can I finish, Councillor Wilson? The question to be answered. So if you do not know the answer, perhaps a good response would be, I will look into it and respond to you later. And that would be a better response than to say what you said, because we as scrutineers are supposed to ask the question. We asked the question of this executive, which has been in office for 6 years. I know you are new in position, but the executive hasn't changed.
No, I would argue that the executive on this one has been working longer than 6 years. That's the point. What is our defining strategy of where do we take this back?
Okay, so perhaps what the member means is that he's going to
12 is longer than 6 years.
He's going to come back to us with an answer. Okay, thank you.
Chair, can I ask a question? My hand's been up for quite some time.
Oh, sorry, I didn't notice you. And if you did, I would give you some latitude to come in. We're 2 minutes over. Do come in.
Just a really quick one. Thank you, Chair. So what I'm not started on really is the level of demand, and I wonder whether there's an increase in demand for the services of sex workers in Newham. If we don't know the answer to that now, can that be factored into the needs assessment? And I say that because, as we all know, there's been at least 3 murders of sex workers in Newham over the past few years. And I think that we need to have that coordinated approach, which is absolutely right. But equally, as if the public health approach is right, but also the policing and enforcement approach is absolutely essential. So could we get a report back on what's happening around reducing, and whether it's cross-border, I'm not sure, Neil, but whether we've got people coming into Newham seeking sex workers, and if we do, how we address that with our partners in the Met and other partners, so that we've got that kind of coordinated response to that issue. So if we can get that in the report, that would be great. Thank you.
Simon, to answer that briefly.
Yes, thanks. Simon?
The needs assessment will look to pull a range of different data sets. And just to go back to Councillor Masters quickly, we're doing some stuff in substance use at the moment and a needs assessment there where it becomes a live needs assessment. So you don't repeat it in 5 years' time, you use live data sets. This will be slightly different because if I was looking at diabetes, I would have loads and loads of data to be able to kind of analyze. For something like sex work, you're going to have some data, but a huge amount of lived experience and qualitative information. So where it's data, we will look to have it as a live data set, but this one will be a lot of qualitative, a lot of talking to people and such.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I don't think my question was answered, Simon. What was the answer to my question?
Yes, the needs assessment will look to capture all of the data that we can capture relating to sex work.
Next question.
Sorry, specifically in relation to demand and whether that's cross-borough.
We are still scoping the needs assessment, but we will look to gather all of the data we can on sex work.
Right, great. I look forward to that report back. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone who took part in this session. And I now move that the letter to the mayor and the key concerns sent by the chair on behalf of the committee and the mayor's letter of reply be noted. Is that noted?
Yeah, sorry, wasn't there a question?
And I've just come into.
Sorry.
Councillor Booker, do you want to, at this point, make a contribution?
I think I would like for us to note it, but also request for us to an official request for us to be part of the sort of decision scrutiny around this would be.
So I think the cabinet member already indicated that he's willing as pre-decision scrutiny of this.
In terms of us agreeing that that would be a good next step.
Okay.
I think that would be positive rather than having a history repeats itself.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's 10 years ago, 6 years ago.
So we pushed at an open door there. So thank you.
Best doors to
Chair, that other resolution.
Yes. So I now move on to item 7. Basically, item 7 is asking us to look at the next year's work program, that's the next municipal year. What I would suggest, rather than taking this item now, we defer this item. I don't know what colleagues think about it, because it would be a new scrutiny, new chairs, etc. We do not know what their manifestos will be saying, and what position they will want to take. So I don't want to bind the hands of a future scrutiny at this stage. Is that acceptable?
Yeah.
Okay. We now move to item 8 of the agenda, and that is report from these chairs. And again, because we'll be discussing the annual report, can I ask that we take item 8 and item 9 together? I think it would make sense if we combine those two items, item 8 and 9. So item 8 is giving individual report, but then we have the annual report. And I think that would give us more time to discuss the annual report if members so wish. Is that agreed? Okay, and so item 9, the purpose of this item is to agree a report of the Scrutiny Committee for 2022-23. This report will summarize the work of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and the commissions for this current municipal year. I would invite chairs of the various committee, if they so wish, to present their work. So over to chairs. Who wants to go first? If chairs.
The Booker is indicating that it's me to go first. In the absence of Councillor Lee Parkway and you being in the chair, Councillor Paul. So, as you've already seen, our main deep dive in health scrutiny was looking at health inequalities across the board. So this evening, we commended the maternity care report looking at inequalities, but we've also sort of done deep dives into mental health services, into primary care, into dentistry and disability services. And what was really important to us was that we took on board concerns raised by residents. So that led to dentistry and primary care both making it onto the agenda. And it's given us an excellent opportunity to sort of drill down into areas that we would want to sort of bring back and sort of home in on moving forward, so that there are particular topics you can expect to see on our agenda should I be back as chair. Just wondering if there's anything else I should say, because that sort of pretty much. I mean, the other thing we did was just looking at the new integrated care system, where there's been a level of slippage, but going forward we'll be holding that to account. And then the other thing to mention is that there's a new CQC inspection framework coming into adult social care that could give the Minister for Health greater intervention in our social care. So there's a lot of work underway at the moment to make sure that our adult social care services are up to scratch. And going forward, that will be something that we will be deep diving into at an opportune moment. And I think that does conclude my work, actually.
Okay.
So hopefully there'll be some more reports coming on that work. And then, of course, we're also part of the Inner North East London Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which looks at the changes in the North East London system, but from that North East London tier. So again, we've continued to sort of keep tabs on that. And then the only other thing to mention is that we've innovated within the structure of health scrutiny, so that where before we had a standing item on COVID, we found that restrictive. So we now have an open space at the beginning of each of our meetings where stakeholders can bring pressing concerns, which have included bed capacity to a large extent, but equally things like a spike in the level of requests for ADHD diagnoses, which was seen as the encroachment of the private sector into our health. So we can be watching that kind of thing very, very closely going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Booker.
The work of the Education, Children and Young People's Commission over this past year has really had some quite large and important aspects to it because of reports that had happened, so particularly around children's services. Both myself and previous chair, yourself, chair, inputted into the Ofsted evaluation of children's services. And at the very beginning of the year, seeing us reaching a good Ofsted rating, but ensuring that we're actually continuing to look at the elements that were still not up to scratch, and ensuring that they wasn't getting lost in the kind of fanfare of a good rating is something that we've wanted to ensure. Also, with the a written statement of action, we've actually had send as a standing item for the whole year because we have such a poor rating for our send provision. We've wanted to have an update on the written statement of action each session. We then had a 6-month update at our last meeting, which was very useful, but really does show that we're only part way and that actually there's still quite a way for us to go in order to be able to say that we're doing a good job with our send provision. So that's something that hopefully will continue into the next municipal year. Some of the highlights, one of the highlights particularly is that the way that we made our work programme was by looking at lots of different stakeholders, so people from the education sector, the local voluntary sector, people that were working in a number of different specific areas around education, children and young people were able to feed into the work programme that we created, as well as the executive as well, of course. Highlights included the introduction, through our questioning, the introduction of an anti-racism policy within the corporate complaints for children's services. providing a platform for commission members, the executive and the public to hear directly from young people around mental health provision. We had young people coming in and delivering their witness kind of statements to us and answering questions, and that was really very powerful. And I hope really kind of made a difference in terms of us hearing directly from young people and giving them a voice. The opportunity to speak to frontline social workers was another highlight of this particular time, and advocating for higher levels of spending on mental health per child, and was something that we've also done as a joint scrutiny between health and children's, that we've written to the North East London people around how much Newham is receiving in support for its young people around mental health services. So those are some of our highlights, and looking to the next municipal year, there are certainly some elements that would be good to continue, whoever happens to be leading it. There's sort of some areas that we're only part way through, so I'd hope that they'll be able to be picked up in the next municipal year.
Thank you very much. Councillor Daniel Lee Parkway has sent his apology because he's committed elsewhere this evening. So I would go next, and what I do, I would talk about overview, then I would go into my commission. And just for the viewing public to understand the function of overview, which is this meeting that we're in, the role of the overview committee is to oversee the scrutiny function and provide overall scrutiny management and oversight of any scrutiny commission that it appoints. This commission remits includes legislative power and responsibility for local authority scrutiny committees, including health scrutiny, and we have some legal powers to speak to our health partners and Councillor Masters and demonstrate that amply with the health report. The crime and disorder partnership, that's include the police and other statutory bodies, and the flood risk management. So also as a scrutiny, we have a responsibility to make certain that the flood risk management is up to date to protect us from flooding. And scrutiny can appoint and has appointed 4 commissions. And those are the commissions that my colleagues have just narrated and spoke about, which is the health, the children and young people. I will be speaking about the crime in a few minutes. And Councillor Lee Parkway committee is regeneration, housing, and environment. During this year, we have questioned the executive. Several executive members came before this committee and spoke on the various items, and members will be very much a part of that and knew what the items were that we discussed. And some of those items were to do with council performance, how the council is performing and delivering on the priorities, that is the mayor's manifesto priorities and the priorities that is based on the council corporate plan. One of our main functions is looking at the budget, both budget monitoring and also which we have done throughout this municipal year, and also the mayor's budget proposal for the next municipal year. We've spent quite a considerable amount of time looking at that and making recommendations to the executive on the mayor's budget proposal. Some of the work we look at is in response to Ukraine, Syria, and the crisis in Afghanistan, and those that to deal with refugees. We looked at community assembly and still spending, and that was most recently. And the intervention being made to help sex workers, and that is another topic that we just discussed. And the James Riley point, in fact, this has been as a matter of a call-in, with scrutiny upheld the call-in, scrutiny made some recommendation, it went to the executive, and the executive rejected the recommendations, but those are some of the work that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee has done this year. I then move on to the crime and antisocial behavior scrutiny commission. Most of our work in this commission was focused on enforcement and community safety. And in terms of enforcement, there's a wide range of enforcement issues around the council, whether it's about parking, whether it's about fly tipping, whether it's about people behaving in an antisocial manner. We looked at all manner of enforcement. We look at the community safety partnership. We look at women's safety and girls in Newham. We look at domestic violence, domestic abuse, and needs assessment strategy over the previous or this current year. Obviously, there's much more to be done. The work program is a very ambitious one. There is never enough time in any municipal year to do all the work that we set out to do. However, in the next municipal year, there would be a continuation of some of these work, especially enforcement, because colleagues, enforcement is something that exercises us quite a lot, and women's safety. And I suppose we would continue to be discussing that. One of the issues, the PSPO, which the mayor decided not to go ahead with, that is one of the key area of concern for this committee. We have dealt with it in several meetings, and it was announced that the mayor wouldn't continue. We obviously would have our views on that, but we won't at this stage comment, because this is not a crime commission. So I would reserve comments about that for another meeting. So there's where we are. There's a forward to this, and what I would suggest to colleagues, when this meeting concludes, if we stay back about a few minutes, we then go over the forward that I've prepared for this report. So, Nate and Councillor Charter and Hudson. No.
Sure, I have 2 points. The first is similar to points that have been raised at previous meetings about information received from the executive arriving on the day of the meeting. And it only feels fair to make the same point about this report arriving from scrutiny chairs. I have enjoyed listening to the presentation we've just had, and I appreciate the hard work being done by the scrutiny chairs, and certainly to make me feel welcome as a new member of scrutiny. But receiving this report on the day of the of this meeting, when many of us have other work, doesn't give us the time to properly scrutinize it. And it only feels fair to make the same point because I made the point so strongly to the executive at a previous meeting. The second point is actually in regards to the budget scrutiny section. It talks about the recommendations that budget scrutiny made being the executive. That's not accurate about what actually happened. The budget scrutiny provided recommendations that overview and scrutiny considered, amended, and then provided to the executive for a response. And that matters because the recommendations listed in this report are not the ones that were passed to the executive. Specifically, a recommendation that overview and scrutiny felt fit to remove from recommendations in relation to the minimum residency for housing. And so it feels important that the recommendations in this report are accurate about what overview and scrutiny actually recommended happened, because we disagreed with the recommendations of budget scrutiny.
Thank you, Councillor Higgins, for bringing that to our attention, especially with regard to the recommendation. And I will ensure that it's corrected before this go onto the council agenda. And you're quite right regarding the lateness of the report. Some of us are peeved by it, but it's not a matter that I would discuss openly here. But I get your point. I get it. And I can only, as I'm chair of this committee, apologize to you and all other councillors who's not a part of the chairs forum. So we are sorry that this was tabled at this stage. Councillor Charter.
Yeah, section 9.3 of the report, and just having quick answers here. My reference to ongoing evaluation centre for.
9.3, yes.
Yeah, now, my understanding is that Mr. Meakin still has to see governance and scrutiny. So why are we spending more money on another review when we haven't looked at the last review?
That is something that I cannot answer because that is within the executive who is what I know, and I'm pressing, as some of us are pressing for, and this is going even to the audit, etc., is that one, the recommendations and the developmental point that was raised in the previous light touch report is being actioned, and whatever training and other issues that it's raised be addressed and addressed now. And I know that is work being carried out. I also know that there's another set of work being done. That is not work that we've commissioned. So that is not work that I can say that, you know, I have any control over. Any work that is going to be done to make us better, I welcome. But the point that I think you want to raise is that the work that's been done before, it hasn't come to us formally as yet.
Chair, I think because it has gone to audit,
Yes.
and I've seen it, I think it's a failure of collective council not to bring that report,
Yeah.
or not to have or impress on the executive, provide a response to it. That circle needs to be closed
Yeah.
before we move on to the next stage. So if there is a way of leaving a lasting legacy before we all go off to different committees or wherever, is it possible to ask the executive in this report and make it clear that it's upon them that we haven't received this? Because that's £7,000 that we spent on that report that very few people have actually seen.
Okay, so basically what we're going to need to do now is to add 4.3A, basically 4.3, sorry, 9.3 is another paragraph two, reflecting the sentiment of Councillor Charter in terms of the report. And the fact that we need to carry out the developmental work, which I know is undergoing, but hasn't been put in. So thank you for your input into the report, Councillor. Councillor Hudson.
Yeah, it's really on number 7, budget scrutiny, and that which was the meeting on the 20th of December. Yes, the meeting on the 20th of December, which doesn't seem to be mentioned at all. Maybe it's being erased from history. And the reason why I raise that is that if you look at the budget, the actual budget, which there was the biggest number in the budget was £130 million for capital works on opportunistic investments, and there was no scrutiny of the £130 million at all. And in the budget book, I just that's an example. And in the budget book, there are only 6 words describing £130 million budget allocation, when the budget itself was something like 200 pages. So the biggest number had the most limited scrutiny. So I think you need to say something. I just use that as an example. I just think you need to say something about the meeting on the 20th of December, which limited the ability to scrutinise the budget.
Can I? Okay, I will comment on that. Can I move that we extend standing order?
Seconded.
Okay. Thank you. Right, Councillor Hudson. In response to that, yes, that is an omission from the report, and
It's in the chairs forward. Isn't
yes, I know it's in the chairs forward, but that is an omission from this actual bit of the report, although I have put it in the chairs forward. Just
on that, the chairs forward is part of the report
Yes.
that we are being asked to know.
Yes.
I'm not sure what the formal recommendation is. If it's here, we could read it.
Yeah.
Just extended standing orders. Is the procedural thing we could do to just take 5 minutes to let members read it?
Yes, and as I said to you, once the meeting concluded, we can peruse the change forward and play around with the wording if we like to play around with the wording. What I don't want to do, this would be basically some housekeeping and work, and it wouldn't be fair on the public for us to be doing this in public, because this is still a public meeting. But
Does that work procedurally for us to change it after we agree it?
basically the change forward is a change forward. I'm only extending it to colleagues, the courtesy,
Right.
have an input, but it's done to the chair or the chairs to write the forward. It's not the committee to write the forward. Okay, but it's just an extension of a matter of courtesy. Okay. Right. Anyone else?
Just because it's slightly based on that, there are some things that I presume are going to be updated, because when the chair's board goes in, then page numbers will change. Because there's a few places where it says page X rather than a number. So we're agreeing it, but that's just little bits to change, yeah.
Okay.
On omissions from the budget scrutiny section, obviously this is my first term on overview and indeed my first term on the council. From what I understand, previous budget scrutinies had external experts or cooperatives or something of that order. We didn't have that, and luckily we had the expertise of two particular members on the scrutiny commission, which was very helpful. But it would also be helpful to have had those independent members or experts, and it feels like that ought to be mentioned that we should have it next time.
Yeah. That is something that I have pressed for in previous years. We did go out this time for independent members, and there was no one who was willing to be co-opted. So in two previous years, 2 or 3, we went out this time, and it's something that we will be doing. We'll be going out again next year. Well, I said we, but I speak as a because I just told Councillor Wilson.
Can that go in the report?
Scrutiny would be going out again next year, hopefully, to invite independent expertise into the process. Likewise, the reason Paul is here is because scrutiny has gone out to invite independent members onto the scrutiny commission. And what we need to do is also, there's 2 vacancies. There's 2 more Pauls that we're supposed to have. And that is something that we're supposed to be going out to recruit 2 more independent commissioners or scrutineers onto the overview and scrutiny committee. So again, you're pushing at an open door. There's something that we want to do is to bring in. Yeah.
I'm aware. I just think it ought to be in the report.
Yeah, yes, we can, yes. So what the report is going to say, we tried, but there was no takers. No one was willing to sit on it at this time. Yeah, okay.
I just, following on from Councillor
You make a note of that.
I think it was not only the independent members of this committee, but it was also the scope of the witnesses. For whatever reason, as we all know, well, the meetings were curtailed. Is it possible that also we can pick up on that? Because I think I did mention it at the time that we needed to have a wider pool of witnesses before us as well, especially looking at the impact on the voluntary sector of some of the commissioners. So I think, again, if we're learning lessons and we're leaving this as a legacy for our future colleagues, then I think we need to have that in there somewhere.
Yeah, point. And that is a valid point that Rita's made. Because so far for this, apart from the independent scrutineers that we bring on, we only talk to executive. We don't talk to the voluntary sector, how our budgeting is going to affect them, etc. And that is something to be built into the process. So we talk to residents and the voluntary sector in terms of how the budget is affecting them. So that is something in terms of aspiration. And perhaps what we can do is find somewhere in the change forward also to include that bit of it. So, we're going to take that in. It's going to make its way into the report. Whether it's make its way in the body or in the change forward, we need to find its way there. Yes.
I'm very sorry to be making another point. I just recall reading about the date on which we formally reconstituted the commission. The work of our commission felt quite rushed. Certainly, there was expression that we couldn't fit in meetings and stuff at certain points. It was the date so it was established in November. Is that sort of when it's normally established, or was that late? And, in the cycle of the year, if it is late, can we comment on that?
I didn't get that. What was established?
So the Budget Working Commission was established by overview and scrutiny on the 8th of November. Was that late?
No. I'll tell you why it wasn't late. Budget scrutiny can happen anytime during the year. But once overview is to ask budget scrutiny to look into something. What we have done prior to November, we've been looking at in-year spending. We can only look at the budget proposal once the mayor has published our budget. Published it in December thereabout. So when it's formally convened, it's just in time to look at. But we tend to do it before. So this commission, the last commission, which you were a member of, that would run until we decided to have a new one.
Right.
So although the municipal year is going to start, the membership of that commission wouldn't change until an expression of interest goes out, and that one goes out in the autumn.
It's good to know I continue to be a member of it. That's good. I didn't know that.
So that would go until the autumn, and then an expression of interest would go out, and then it would change. So
for a year,
the commission will still look at in-year spending of the departments that tend to overspend or at risk of overspending.
Sorry, but does that mean we're still members of the Budget Working Commission even after the municipal year?
Yeah, because yes, because that is customer practice, and that is how overview has done it. We could, if we go out for an expression of interest now, because remember, none of us are overview members yet. It's not until overview is formally established at the AGM. And when overview is established at the AGM, then we always know what committees we'll be sitting on, etc. And what we tend to do at that point, we don't actually, we can change it, it's not set in stone, but we don't normally focus on the budget commission because we know we have commissioners already in place. And they will just continue their work until we can, if we need to change it. But they will just continue their work until a new committee is formed.
Okay.
So there's no gap in the committee. If not, we'd have a gap. We don't want to have a gap. And especially because these commission members are the ones that know the recommendations, etc. It's better to have some continuity until a new commission is formed in the autumn.
Really helpful to know.
Yeah. Any other member? No, if so, we've taken on board, so we're going to pencil in those changes. All right, so having said that, can we agree that we put subject to the amendments? And can I ask also that chairs be given delegated authority to finalize this and make sure that amendments go in, etc. Do we agree to that?
Chair, I'm very sorry. I know I'm making myself very much not popular. Because it has come up so often that we receive information from the executive too late to sometimes to efficiently scrutinize it. Should that not be a point in our report? That feels like something that ought to be in there.
Councillor Masters, you want to say something?
Again, I think that's in the chair's forward.
Okay, sorry, I'm commenting on things that I haven't seen it, so I don't know.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to look at the forward in a minute. Okay. So, thank you. So I take it that we have agreed the report subject to the changes that were commented on. And I ask for chairs to be given authority to make those changes and cross the I, dot the I's, cross the T's wherever we see fit. Okay, thank you. And item 10, appointments. At this stage, there is no appointments to be made. Item 11, the forward plan. Is there any item, any contribution to the forward plan? This is the council's forward plan. And item 12, the date of the next meeting. I cannot at this stage give a date for the next meeting. That will be depend on, that goes into the next municipal year. We have given officers a steer in terms of the number of meetings we need to have. Officers are going to take that away and come up with some dates. So basically, I am proposing that we have between May and August, we have 3 meetings at least 3 meetings. And so they will pencil in some dates in that for those 3 meetings to happen. So if you look at 3 meetings between them, I don't know what days they're going to fall on. Yeah. So is that noted?
Noted.
Okay, I now bring this meeting to a close, a formal close, and we can stay back to look at the forward. Thank you.